Thanks, Grace and Tim. Thank you for hosting us. And even though I can't see any faces, it's great to see all the names in the box of the attendees. My name is Jim Kane. I'm a senior pension specialist with the NEA. I've been with the NEA since 2019 and have about another 15 years or so experience working with a couple other unions prior to that, working on pension and collective bargaining and research issues. Tonight, I'm going to just quickly go over the 4 areas that we plan to cover. And so we're going to start by talking about what is a defined benefit pension at a very high level, just kind of focusing on like what the structure of the benefit is. Next, we'll dive into why this works, both for employees and for the employer. And then from there, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Michael Hairston, who's going to walk us through some case studies showing the importance of defined benefit plans in contrast to defined contribution plans. And we'll wrap up by talking about some resources both from NEA and our partners that we work with on pension issues. So I think most people are familiar with the way that a defined contribution plan like a 401k works, where you're putting in your contributions, maybe your employer is putting in your contributions, and then it's largely up to the market from there to determine how things work as you head towards your retirement age. In a lot of ways, a defined benefit pension plan is the polar opposite in that your benefit payment is guaranteed and predictable. And so what we have here on the screen is just a theoretical example. And this is sort of the core calculation that's used in a very simplified defined benefit plan. And there can be variations on this, but I think historically, this is the way that most plans at least started out with their calculations. And so going from left to right here, your benefit's going to be determined by how long you work. So obviously, as years of service working goes up, your benefit goes up. Your final average salary. And so this usually is calculated over a range of years at the end of your career. So it may be 3 years, and maybe 5 years. Some cases it can be a bit longer, up to 10, but I would say in most cases, usually around 5. And then the multiplier. And so this is kind of a wonky term that determines how much you earn each year. So, if you were to have a multiplier of 2% a year and you worked 10 years, you're going to end up with an multiplier that when you have the multiplier times the years of service, you would have 20% of your final salary as your benefit. Hopefully I stated that in a way that isn't too confusing, but generally as the more generous the multiplier is, the better your benefit is going to be in the end. So for each of these 3 things, depending on the way that the benefit is structured, each one individually, as it's more generous, will end up resulting in a higher pension at the end. And as I stated at the beginning, the real important thing here is that you know what you're going to accumulate over your career that you plan to work with the employer, and it's not up to the market to determine what your retirement benefit is going to look like. And there may be other benefits embedded in the retirement plan itself. So a lot of plans may have a disability benefit. There's also inflation protection built into a lot of plans, and we'll talk about this more a few slides later with COLA benefits. So how else can we talk about this? In a lot of ways, a defined benefit plan is we could call it a mutual aid compact, where the outcomes of plan participants are intertwined with each other. And also you have one generation looking out for the next. And you have the employer and the employees both contributing. So It's unlike a 401k plan or other defined contribution plans where everything is individualized and you're basically just looking at your own outcomes based on the market and how much you put in. Here, everyone's looking out for each other, trying to get towards the end goal. And so this also plays into why this works, both for the employees and the employer. And a lot of this comes down to the way that risks are allocated in a defined benefit plan as opposed to a defined contribution plan. And so I touched on this a little bit earlier in previous slides, but I think putting this together here will help understand the differences between the two plans. So as we go down the left-hand column here, we're going to talk about three types of risks. The investment risk, meaning what happens in the market. Longevity risk, meaning how long you will live in retirement. And then inflation risk. As we're seeing, I think everyone is very aware of inflation right now. So the risk that prices increase in retirement and the ability of your benefit to keep up with that increase in prices. And so starting with the investment risk in a defined benefit plan, we talked about how that benefit's structured. It's predetermined what you're going to get. So even though there's a pool of assets that's being professionally managed, if for some reason the investments didn't turn out quite as well as was projected, and this is usually done by actuaries, your benefit is still safe because it's defined, you're going to get that, and the plan has a very long time horizon to make up for the ups and downs in the market. If you're in a defined contribution plan, a 401k, if you happen to run into something like the global financial crisis at the end of your career, that could be catastrophic for the size of the retirement pot that you have, and you may never recover. So going next to the longevity risk, and this, as I mentioned, is thinking about how long you're going to live in retirement. And so for any individual person, it's impossible to know how long you're going to live once you retire. But when you have enough people pulled together, actuaries can project on average how long people are going to live. And so they can pool this risk together and say, okay, this is what we have to aim for in building up assets in the retirement plan. And some people are going to live longer, some people are not going to live as long, but as long as we have a projection of what the average will be, we're in good condition here. Now, going to a defined contribution plan, you have to kind of guess, okay, how long am I going to live? What's the amount of money that I'm going to need? And, you know, because you're just projecting your own life, you know, you may have some inkling, but in a lot of ways, there's a risk that you could outrun your savings in the retirement, the defined contribution plan. So the last risk we have here, the inflation risk, a lot of pension plans have COLA benefits for retirees. And so these will cover usually at least part of the increase in inflation year to year. It may not cover 100%, but you will know that you're at least going to have some protection that your benefit will go up by a certain amount. It could be that the plan has a provision that says the benefit will increase by half of the inflation each year using the consumer price index. So you know that you'll have some protection built in, whereas with a defined contribution plan, you're going to have to rely on assets going up in order to protect yourself against inflation. And I think as we've seen over the last year or so in the market, we have inflation going up and the stock market going down. So we don't always have assets in the stock market and inflation going up together. So again, what we see is that in the defined contribution plan, all of the risk is being shifted onto the employee, whereas with the defined benefit plan, you have it falling with the plan sponsor mostly. And so that's, you know, your employer or the state as the plan sponsor. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the cost effectiveness side of this, and the way that for the dollar, it's easier to, you can provide more benefits with a defined benefit plan as opposed to defined contribution plan. So this is data that was pulled from a study by one of our partners, the National Institute on Retirement Security. And so what they did was look at a typical defined benefit plan and compared it to, on the far right in the chart there, an individually directed defined contribution plan. So this would be a plan where the individual employee is picking their investments. And in the middle, you have an ideal defined contribution plan where if it was set up in a way that the investment picking was done perfectly. And so I think, you know, the individually directed one is the one I want to focus on here, but I'll walk through the differences between all three of them. And so when we compare the defined benefit plan to the individually directed defined contribution plan, we see that the defined benefit plans have a 49% cost advantage. So that is, you know, both good for the employer, but can be beneficial to the employee as well. And if we're going to look at the chart here on the right, the numbers that we're looking at, these are, so the 16.5% that you see with the DB plan bar, that is the percentage of payroll that it costs to provide the defined benefit for everyone in the plan. And so to provide the same level of benefit in an individually directed defined contribution plan, it's going to cost 32.3%. And so the difference is made up of three parts. One is the longevity pooling that we talked about. So because the defined benefit plan can pull everyone together and project on average how long everyone is going to live, they don't have to make guesses about how long any individual person is going to live. And so they can result in better planning. And part of the planning feeds into the investment allocation, which is the less balanced portfolio part, which eats up another 3.8%. So I guess another way of stating that would be if you're an individual, as you approach retirement, your assets in your defined contribution plan are going to have to shift from equity to bonds over time. And it's going to be, you know, it's going to shift gradually as you get older. With the defined benefit plan, because you have everyone pulled together, employees are retiring, new employees are coming in, they can keep a steady composition of the portfolio over time. And so that's the other part of where the cost is coming in. And then lastly, the big 9.7% in light blue at the top there is a comparison of the higher fees in an individually directed defined contribution plan. And so one way to think about that is just the market power. So if you're a big defined benefit pension plan, you can negotiate down lower fees than you can if you're an individual trying to buy into, say, a mutual fund with Vanguard. And so those are the big differences here. The plan in the middle, the ideal DC plan, as I was saying before, it just cuts out that 9.7 if you theoretically came up with a plan that did perfect investment at low fees. But I think more realistically, we're looking at the DV plan versus the individually directed DC plan. So kind of coming back to the larger picture here, if you're the employer, you either can spend the same amount and provide a higher benefit with a DV plan, or if you were trying to cut costs, you could spend less for the same benefit in the DC plan. Obviously, we want the first case here, but if the costs are skimped on the DC plan, it's going to feed. If the employer tries to provide a lower benefit to save costs, it's going to feed into other issues like recruitment and retention. And so what I want to talk about here is just the way that having a good DV plan feeds into the ability of a public sector employer to be able to both recruit new employees and to keep them on. And so just pulling a couple of quotes here from studies by our partners, the National Institute of Retirement Security. And so we know that when given an unbiased choice between a defined benefit plan and a defined contribution plan, public sector workers overwhelmingly choose the real pension, the defined benefit. And so, we can think about how that feeds into the ability to bring new workers in to the workplace. We're seeing all across the country shortages in public sector workforces, and this is certainly a part of the picture. And we also know that once someone is vested in their pension plan, and this will differ from plan to plan, but oftentimes is maybe 5 years, could be 10 years. But I think 5 years is more the standard. Once they're vested, they tend to stay at that job much longer. So I'm going to wrap up there, turn it over to my colleague, Michael. I know that some of that was maybe a little bit technical, and I'm going to hope that I sounded clear, but certainly we'll have the Q&A at the end where I can clear up anything that sounded a little foggy.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm Michael Harrison, Senior Pension Specialist with the NEA. Also spent about 30 years in the classroom as a music teacher, and delighted to be here with you. So what I want to talk about briefly here is a few case studies of where state retirement plans have abandoned the DB pension plan that Jim spoke about in lieu of something else. And just to put it in context, most state pension plans operate with what we call like a three-legged stool, where you have the employee contributing to the plan, the employer contributing to the plan, and then the rest is made up in investment income or investment return, so that you're able to pay retirement benefits when a member or employee ultimately retires. Those three-legged parts of the stool, make up the resources needed to pay those benefits. Now, and most of the time when there are changes to the plan, it's never the employee that does not make their contributions. Employee always honors that, but sometimes due to competing interests or whatever politics, the state may not make their portion of the contributions. And that's when plans sometimes get into trouble. So I'm going to cite two states that that was sort of the case. And it just made it really difficult for the workers, the employees, to try to deal with another arrangement like a DC plan, as Jim talked about. And the first case would be West Virginia. So in 1991, the West Virginia teachers' retirement system was closed after decades of underfunding. And what that means is the employees contributed, they tried to make up the rest in investment in return, pay benefits, but the state didn't make their full contributions to the plan for a number of years. So that That makes the plan get into trouble. Then you get to an unfunded, increases your unfunded liabilities. So after decades of underfunding, the system was closed. And the educators contributed like 6% of their paycheck into the retirement plan, but as I said, the employer didn't live up to their end of the bargain. Instead of paying their share, they moved the new hires to a 401k style plan. And after many years, it's like the early 2000s, they looked at, and I'm sure they had all kinds of problems in terms of recruiting and retaining educators and workers, that they figured out, like, this is really not working for us. These 401k type plans, DC plans, they are not, I use 401k and DC plan interchangeably, but they are not working. They're not meeting our needs. We can't recruit, we can't retain good folks. So they studied, and 14 years later, with fewer than 18,000 active teachers paying into the fund and nearly 27,000 retirees, the funding level sank. So the 401k plan just left teachers and educators grossly unprepared for retirement. You just couldn't retire. So after years and years, they reopened the defined benefit plan. And I think they gave educators a choice, and right at 80% of them chose to go back into that plan. Now the plan seems to be doing fine now, and that's a real testament. That's one of the places in the country where they had a problem with the funding. They didn't make their contributions, and then they realized that was really going to be a significant problem for workers, and not only that. The state as well, because you got to figure employees work in a system for a career. They retire in that system. They'll take those dollars and they'll put it right back into those communities in which they've serviced for 20 or 30 years. So that's an economic piece of the puzzle that sometimes it's not considered. But the good news is they in 2005 they reopened the defined benefit pension plan, and that was a real big deal for West Virginians and those folks that worked in that system. The second state that I'll reference is Alaska, and they didn't fare quite as well as West Virginia did. In the situation with Alaska, there was some type of error in their accounting in 2000. I think it was 2005. And they, instead of trying to fix the error, it created a big unfunded liability. And the state sued the firm and used the settlement money to close the plan, and again, do the same thing that West Virginia did, go to a 401k type DC plan. So this was in 2005. And to this day, that plan is still what's in place. They did not return to a defined benefit plan. And if you look at the state of Alaska and their ability to recruit and retain, just recruit workers and educators, it's dismal. It's really a horrible situation. New hires can only participate in the defined contribution plan. And so they've had a horrible time in trying to recruit and retain folks to work in that system. They've even resorted to sign-in bonuses to try to recruit folks to come to work there, but it has not really been effective. There's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes for years to try to change that, to get them to reopen the defined benefit plan, but it has not yet happened. And this is the kind of thing Jim and I work on day to day, making sure that the core benefit of these defined benefit plans are maintained and protected, and even enhanced where there are opportunities to do that. But those are two situations where they actually closed the plan, and in the case of Alaska, they have not to this day reopened it, and it's created a significant problem for them to try to recruit and retain folks. Now, a couple of things I wanted to touch bases with you on is we have a wealth of resources that we're able to share with you, and if there are problems with the systems, we're able to share resources and give you information on how to deal with situations. But we have partners like the National Public Pension Coalition, and that's a group of labor like AFT, NEA, ASME, SAIU, and we work together and provide resources to states when there are pension fights, where there are issues and they have a coalition in place. We work with states to try to make sure that that defined benefit, the core benefit, remains in place. And I would encourage you to go to their website that we'll share with you, because they have a series of videos that talk about pensions, talk about how they work, some of the things that Jim covered earlier, talk about how they're structured, how they work, who our enemies are, who try to go out and disrupt or destroy our gut pensions. There are one-pages on it and videos that are really instructive that we encourage you to look at. It's called the National Public Pension Coalition. We also are partners with, Jim mentioned the National Institute on Retirement Security, and they have a wealth of information that on the benefits of having a defined benefit pension plan and how it supports the local economy, how that it's an economic engine, how it helps you to recruit and retain workers. And that's another good source for, and they have all kind of data and reports on. They even have one set of reports where you can look at the state of, say, West Virginia. You can see how many dollars go into the pension plan, how much the taxpayer pays, and how much output that is. For example, this is just an example. You put $1 in, you get $4 out. That's the economic engine of a pension. Pensions work exactly the way they're designed to. The employee contributes, the employer contributes, they make the rest up in benefit and investment income, and you're able to pay benefits, and those benefits, those educators, they take that money and they spend it right in the community. They go to the barbershop, they go to the grocery store, they go to they buy cars. This is what a pension should work. They work exactly like they're designed to. But there are others out there that don't see it that way. They think you should have control of your own money and not have a pension. And we just feel like the pension is the absolute best way to recruit and to retain good folks and have an economic engine in those communities. So I'll stop right there, Tim, and see if there are questions or that we're happy to answer.
Thank you, Michael and Jim, for today's presentation. At this time, we are going to open up the floor for question and answer. We will address the questions in the order in which they have been received until we run out of time. As a reminder, only questions posted in the Q&A feature will be included in this portion of the webinar. If you have posted a question in the chat box, please restate your question using the Q&A feature so that it can be included in our discussion or follow-up communication should we run out of time. And now I'm going to hand it off to Tim Barchak.
Okay. Well, I did scoop one question here out of chat, although as Grace said, from here on out, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So Michael and Jim, a question is, how many new educators are really informed about retirement? Have there been any surveys or research on that issue that test really the depth of knowledge of our educators?
I'll take a stab at it. That's a real problem because you figure when someone's hired in a school district, whatever job they have to perform, They go to some type of orientation, and sometimes a small slither of that orientation may talk about your benefits. And the pension sometimes is not at the top of the list. You know, as a teacher, I know my first day when I went to the new teacher orientation, we went in and you had all of the benefits folks there, but you had so many other things that you had to try to figure out, okay, what healthcare plan am I going to take? And they briefly touched on the pension. There was a table there and there have been significant efforts to improve that, but I think we still have a lot of work to do. And I'm not sure of any surveys that would indicate the level of knowledge that a new educator, but I think there are strong efforts to change that, to give them as much information as possible, particularly when we're trying to recruit and retain folks. You say, look, if you stay in this profession for a career, this is what you have to look forward to. So I'm not sure that there's always ways to improve that. We always need to try to improve that because it's not where I'm just citing my experience there. We even with the retirement plan, we created an ambassador program so we could do more to educate new employees as they came in. Hey, this is your benefit. This is what you have. You're contributing to this retirement plan. And if you stay here, this is what you get. Those kind of things. But it's very difficult to get their attention, new educators' attention, because they're thinking so many other things at that point. They're not looking long-term. They're not looking 30 years down the road. Okay, if I stay here, this is what I have. And not until they've been in the classroom or been in the system for 5, 6, 7 years, and then they say, oh, wow, I have this benefit. And then they start to pay attention to it and realize, okay, part of my money is coming out of my check to support this, and ultimately it's going to return, and I have this benefit for life. Then they start to, really pay attention to what that happened. But I don't know of a survey. We haven't done one.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. So as all of our folks on this webinar know, ESP members are vulnerable to privatization. And what would you say to ESP members who are facing a privatization proposal where the contractor is trying to present themselves as a good guy and says something along the lines of, hey, I can come in as the private contractor and give you $1 an hour raise. Now you won't have your pension, but you'll have all this, you'll have this increased pay up front. Is that a good bargain for folks?
I can take a stab at that. I mean, first, I feel like I should acknowledge that if you're presented with that, it's hard to not think about the increase in pay, even if it's not the biggest potential increase. But I think that one thing that happens often is that people underestimate just how valuable a retirement plan is. If you're in a defined benefit plan already and you were offered this, the amount that you would lose by being able to have that guaranteed payment starting in retirement, maybe if you live 25 years, what you're giving up, I think, usually is significantly undervalued. It's hard to think about these actuarial calculations to try to figure out, okay, what is the value that I'm giving up here? But it's both a high number and it's something that's guaranteed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
anything to add to that, Michael?
I can think of one case in particular where an individual, there was a educator that had the option to opt out of the retirement plan and take a DC plan, which would be equivalent to somebody saying, okay, you can privatize this, we'll give you a raise. I think they saw it as a raise, and a few years later, They came back to me individually and said, I wish I'd never done that because now I have to work longer to be able to have a benefit that will hopefully last me the rest of my life. Where if I'd stayed in the retirement plan, I could have, I could take that off the table. I know I'll have a guaranteed benefit the rest of my life. And the money up front, you know, it's a ploy. And sometimes school districts are looking for ways to, unfortunately, save, and they end up spending more by cutting that benefit or trying to change the retirement plan in some way, and it's just not a smart thing to do. The chart that I think Jim had a specific chart to that, that pointed to that, what it would cost if you were running a DB plan and a DC plan. The cost is more and less of a benefit. So we would just encourage you to just hang in there with the benefit structure that you have. If you have a DB plan, stick with it.
Okay, thank you. So both of you gentlemen are able to keep your fingers kind of on the national pulse of the way the struggle for pensions is going. So let me ask you, what's the prognosis for defined benefit pensions after decades of attack from employers and right of center politicians? What do you guys see the prognosis?
I guess I could start. I think that we're seeing signs that maybe the tide is shifting a bit, and a lot of it is the issues around shortage of employees in the public sector, particularly. And so you're seeing more and more articles where people are talking about, and this is, for the private sector, they're saying, well, maybe it's time to bring back the defined benefit plans in the private sector. And the conversations that are happening in the public sector about the shortages, they can't not talk about the structure of the pension plans and the way that those are used both for recruitment and retention. So I think, coming out of the 2008 crisis and the way that lowered the funding ratios for a lot of plans, it opened up avenues of attacks for people that want to, are small government ideologues that want to get rid of the defined benefit plans. But we're seeing the momentum shift the other way as it becomes more and more apparent just how important these benefits are for having a functioning public sector.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I got a question here actually about a defined contribution plan. When I signed up for a 401k plan about 20 years ago, I was told if I gave $100, my employer would pay half. I never saw anything stating what the employer paid. How can I find out what the employer paid? So basically asking, I've got a defined contribution plan out there. How do you find out what the employer contributed?
I guess we should start by stating that neither Michael and I are currently experts on private sector 401k plans, but I suspect that if you had pay stubs from that time period, you could see the contribution rates there, or sort of end of the year tax statements, you may see them there as well. I guess as a last resort, like if it's a private sector employer, you could ask the HR department. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Michael.
No, I think you hit it right on. If in the case of something like a 403B, which is like an annuity, and would be what school employees sometimes participate in. You get quarterly statements, and you're able to see but typically the employer, that's a contract between you and that particular firm. It's not necessarily that the school district would contribute to that, but I think Jim had it right.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, thinking about it more now, is if the plan was handled by a Vanguard or BlackRock or someone, there may still be records there, assuming the account wasn't closed, and you may be able to reach out to the financial firm itself to see if they have the records.
Okay, thank you both. Question came in here. Will you address the question of some employees receiving Social Security and that affects their employer retirement?
Are you talking about the GPO web, or is that the? Are you?
I'm not sure. Ruth, if you're still on the line, maybe you can type a clarification into the Q&A, and I will, in the meantime, move on to the next question, which is, do we know how many states transitioned ESPs to defined contribution from a defined benefit? So a question there, basically, do we have any stats on how many of our folks have lost their defined benefit pension and been moved to a DC?
Well, we have a source called characteristics, where it talks about the plans and who's in the plans. But we don't know of plans that outside of West Virginia and Alaska that have actually shifted from a DB to a DC or vice versa.
Yeah, and I will put the link to the study that we do periodically that Michael was referring to, the characteristics of public education plans. And so that will give you a snapshot of who's included currently in the defined benefit plans and the defined contribution plans. But I don't want to try to take a stab at saying exactly how many were transferred over time, because I don't want to give a wrong answer, but that study there in the chat will give the snapshot of who currently is across the country.
Great, thank you. And I got clarification on the other question that yes, I was referring to what Michael suggested, GPO/WEP. Not sure of the acronym.
And could you ask the question again fully, Tim?
Yes. Will you address the question of some employees receiving Social Security and that affects their retirement?
Well, what happens with GPO WEP is if you worked in a state where they didn't take out Social Security, and then you went to you worked in a non-Social Security state, and then you worked in a state that had Social Security, that benefit can be reduced for those years, that you didn't work in a Social Security state. That's the GPO part of it. The WEP part is when the spouse is, and that affects not only the employee's retirement benefit, but it could affect the spousal benefit in the case that something happens, and that's a windfall elimination profit. We have lobbyists that we've worked on this issue for a long time to try to change it, but we have not been successful at doing so. There were bills that we supported to rectify it, but some of them created winners and losers, and we couldn't support those, but we tried. We were hopeful in the last Congress that we could make some traction with this, but the main people that were sponsors, I think in Ohio, Brady and Neal, Brady retired, so that was our last, and then we had the right Congress that would would have repealed it, totally repealed it, or at least made adjustments to it so it wouldn't be so onerous. If you were in a situation where you worked in a non-Social Security state and then worked in another state that took out Social Security. But we just didn't see that happen. But there's still efforts on the ground to try to improve that. And that's the number one issue that particularly our retirees talk to us about. What are we doing about GPO WEP? And we, elections really matter. You elect the right people that would be interested in changing this. And the longer we wait to change it or to make incremental changes to it, the more it costs. And then that's the real issue that, folks don't want to really make the investment to make a change.
Right.
I've just had
Michael and
sorry, I wanted to just add a little bit of historical background for why this problem exists. And partly it's because a lot of public sector pension plans predate Social Security. And so there was options either to participate in Social Security, or the state could remain out of Social Security if the defined benefit plan at the state level provided a benefit that was at least as much as Social Security. So that's the historical background. Obviously, it still creates the problems, and we still want to eliminate both GPO and WEP, as Michael said.
Thank you. Do either of you know off the top of your head how many states are in that situation?
I don't want to say specifically, but in the neighborhood of 13.
Wow.
Let me be definitive on that.
Yes, there are some states where some employees are in and others are not. So I think the calculation comes down to like how you want to define it, whether everyone's in, or rather everyone's out, or only some are out. But the number Michael's given you is in the ballpark.
Okay. This is going to be the last question that we have time for. And someone has asked about 403Bs and 457s. I'm not sure what they want to know about those, but you have anything to say about 403Bs or 457s?
Well, I'll start. 403Bs are typically what educators use as this is the point of the takeaway here, as a supplement to a defined benefit pension plan. That's what we believe in. That's what NEA believes in. But they're supplements, and they basically it's a tax sheltered annuity, and you contribute so much and you get so much in a. It used to be you contribute $100, you get 60 or so in a tax. You only contribute about $60+ but at any rate, they it's the thing to watch for 403Bs is to make sure your fee structures are low when you utilize those products, and that's the one takeaway. Make sure your fee structures are, if you decide to use a 403B. The 457s, in my experience, I've seen more administrative types utilize those programs. It's the same, sort of the same concept. But again, if you just make sure your fee structures are low, it's an additional way to save in retirement. Could be advantageous if you have the right fee structure.
Okay, then. Thank you very much, Michael and Jim. And I'm going to toss back to Grace now.
To request a general session specific certificate of completion as a participant of recorded sessions, please send your request by emailing espqweb@nea.org. All requests must include the session title and the on-screen certificate of completion code. Session certificates will not be provided if your viewer code is not included in the email request. Note, due to limitations in our ability to track attendance after live sessions, requests for personalized certificates will only be provided for participants of live webinars whose attendance can be verified. The certificate received for viewing recorded sessions will be session specific, but will not include personalized names. On behalf of the Center for Professional Excellence and Student Learning's NEA ESP Quality Department, I would once again thank our NEA Collective Bargaining and Membership Advocacy colleagues for tonight's webinar presentation, and thank you all for your participation. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night from the NEA ESP Quality Department.